Hi and welcome. I'm Tim Stewart and I'm joined today by Chad Sanderson, and we're going to talk a little bit today about things relating to conversion on this week's Conversionations. So, Chad, how you doing?
I'm good. You know, it's starting to get warm around where I live. Like, it's been really cold in the middle of April for the last few weeks, so I can actually go outside now. Doesn't feel like a nightmare.
Yeah, we've had typical Brit talking about the weather. We've had all manner of rain and sleet and snow in the beginning of April, then we had a couple of glorious days, and then it's kind of back to maybe okay for May. We'll see.
Yeah, I feel like the UK is just perpetually in a state of maybe okay in terms of weather.
in terms of everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously we're an island in the Atlantic, so we get whatever's coming across from either the continent or the Atlantic, we get it in waves. So whatever we've got doesn't last for long, but it typically is something to talk about. So
Yeah, that's
in terms
true.
of weather, I've not really seen much of it. I've not been at home much the last month. I've been to a couple of conferences. I know you at the end of March were at CXL. So really kind of in terms of what's been happening over the last month, what's been interesting in the world of conversion, for me it's been, I guess, seeing people talk about conversion stuff. I was kind of the CRO speaker for AdWorld Experience in Italy, in Bologna, which is a good conference, mostly paid sort of stuff. I saw some interesting stuff from Facebook guys, so we maybe talk about that later on in terms of how they're treating conversion and what they're looking at for return on investment. And then last week I was at Inbound in Madrid, which was very nice. It was 25 degrees there. That was much nicer. Lots and lots of tapas. And I saw Pep Layer and Ollie Gardner were talking on the second day, and on the first day there was Talia Wolf. So there's quite a decent lineup of kind of search and paid and UX people talking, both Spanish natives and international speakers. It was a good conference. I went to the Inbounder in London last year, which was one of the best ones I went to for content. So I thought that I would give this one a try in Madrid, and it was good. I did miss the Brighton SEO one, which I kind of normally like to go to, but I'll catch that in September.
Were you speaking at that one in Madrid, or were you just
No. It was. I quite enjoyed that. For once, I wasn't speaking, so I got to be a punter. I got to sit in the audience and kind of judge people. Just sit there and kind of appreciate kind of the art of it all. Conference speaking is something that's quite difficult, but it's quite rewarding, I guess, in terms of the vibe, the feedback you get from people. But it's interesting to be able to relax and sort of sit there and listen to what other people have to talk about, including about stuff that's not necessarily what people would consider conversion focused. But I'm very much in the camp that thinks we need to pay attention to what's happening with the channels. We need to understand how they're getting audiences. We need to understand how they're targeting, and to a degree what objectives they've got, because we work with the various marketing teams and we're always talking about breaking down silos, and that's kind of one of the things I do fairly regularly. I go to non-conversion conferences. In fact, I probably go to more general marketing conferences than I do conversion ones, simply because that's where a lot of my clients are. That's where a lot of the stuff I need to learn about from the audience, and I need to keep myself educated about what the new ad types are, how people are picking and segmenting audiences, because the work they do, the stuff they send to our site, can make a big difference in terms of what's possible from the conversion rate. So that was a busy month, because I had those two which were external, and obviously you were at Conversion World speaking yourself and the week in between those two, so I kind of participated a bit on that in the chat room, on the Slack. So if those people who did watch Conversion World, if you haven't already joined the Slack, please do. And if you haven't watched Conversion World, what you're playing at, but you can join in. You can join in on the Slack and catch up with some people like myself and Chad and many other people who are obsessive, interested, mildly entertained by conversion and subjects surrounding that. So that was a busy month last month. I had to fit a lot of client work in on top of that as well. How was yours? Because obviously you went to Austin end of March, wasn't it, for CXL?
Yeah. There was I was in Las Vegas. I spoke at the Adobe conference that they had, and then 2 days later I spoke at CXL. And then later on the week, or later on that month, the next month actually was when Conversion World happened. You know, I was actually thinking about this the other day. There's some pretty good Slack channels that you and I are a part of. There's the Conversion World one, obviously, and then there's also Measure Slack. So if you guys haven't joined that one, definitely. So and Measure Slack is great because it's not just. I mean, there is the testing element and there's the analytics element, but there's also a data science piece, and there's also, what else is there?
Data protection and privacy, which doesn't sound like the most exciting subject, but
it's a big one though.
With GDPR coming through, and particularly with the recent news on Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, people are paying attention to what's happening on the computers. They're aware, general public is more aware that this data is being held on them and being used against them. So keeping track of kind of what's current in those areas, and there's a data science one. There's specific areas for Google Analytics and Tag Manager. So there's a lot of active participants in that. I'd like to give a shout out as well to one which BAV runs in the UK, which is called Conversion Rate Analytics Professionals.
I think I'm a part of that.
Yeah, which was, I think, only chosen because it says crap. It's actually not even professionals, I think it's product, but yeah. But that's a lively little UK group, and again, same sort of thing. There are Facebook groups like the CXL Facebook group. There are lots of places to learn outside of blog posts. There's lots of places to keep up to date with what's going on and ask questions that aren't necessarily conference-based, but they are generally inhabited by the people who are going to be at those conferences, speaking at those conferences. So you tend to get a good quality of response. You may have to wait a while because obviously time zones, but it's a way that, certainly one way that, you know, one of my screens is dedicated to kind of like chat and IM for that reason. I've got ask questions or asking questions pretty much all day long. And I think for me, I work by myself. So for even just human contact during the day, it helps on that side of things. But it's also quite good to bounce ideas off people who've got better experience in areas that you don't. I ask you questions about kind of R and Python and stuff like that, and it's not an area of expertise, but it's something where I can kind of just sense check stuff I'm working on and go, hey, here's something cool I'm playing with. What do you reckon?
Yeah. You know, I was thinking about that the other day. You know, like I find sometimes people will pay like a ton of money to go attend a conference, which is totally fine. You know, conferences are great, and the socialization, networking, big part of that. But, you know, you pay all this money, and then you have a lot of these free kind of tools like these Slack channels where you can do a lot of the same stuff that you do at the conferences, usually sometimes with a much wider group of people. And, you know, it doesn't cost anything. Like, there was a guy, I remember I encouraged him to join the Measure Slack channel. And the reason that one is good for our team is because there's a whole, like, I think it's kind of like Adobe Analytics slanted. Seems like it's a bit Adobe slanted.
It's quite US centric. So I think the market penetration for Adobe, even I don't hear many people talking about using Test and Target in the UK side as much. It tends to be more client side, but it's not as commonly used. Whereas you look at sort of the US market, that's got a higher market penetration for Adobe products generally. Maybe not high penetration, but there's a lot more bodies, therefore as a percentage it still equals a high volume of people. So there's quite a lot of noise going on in there for Adobe stuff. But an awful lot of them are asking the same questions. You know, it's about the data center stuff. It's about kind of how to use your EVARs in a way that makes sense for what you want to report on. So we're all facing common problems. I mean, I like conferences because you do get that networking side. There's a limit to what you can do online. I think the online conferences are good. Conversion World's one I've enjoyed for the last few years simply because it has got a community that goes on all year long. It just happens to be, there's a week when something's happening for the actual video. I think the main advantage from conferences, for the most part, the better ones, is to the level of curation. Most of the time, the people you see speaking on stage genuinely know what they're talking about.
Right.
There is a risk with the Slack channels and with the Facebook groups where you end up with blind leading the blind. You ask a question, somebody goes, I don't know, but here's what I reckon. And it can be a bit like Stack Overflow. You get a little bit lost in kind of there may well be a right answer in there somewhere, but you don't know. So I think they serve different purposes. Like the guys who speak on stage tend to be talking about stuff where they're pushing the limits a little bit more. So they'll say, "Here's an example. Here's a use case of something where this is not theoretical. This is something I've been doing, and I'm going to break down the steps as to why here."
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the day-to-day stuff on the internet channels tends to be more kind of, I've got this specific problem, but you're not giving any of the context. People can't share as much. It's so that they kind of serve different purposes. I guess kind of one's more kind of tactical, one's more strategic, maybe. But unless you're particularly dedicated, you're not going to sit there and drink beer whilst you're on Slack. Whereas you can go out and have those more open conversations.
Well, I don't know about all that. I've been in some pretty dark places. No, yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, while we're talking about kind of social channels, the CXL Facebook group is pretty good too.
Yeah.
In terms of the type of conversation, it's like one of the things that's a bit that I've been strongly kind of pushing for the last few months is there's a lot of people in the experimentation optimization space that kind of stumble into the position somehow. Like maybe they were in analytics before, maybe they were in marketing before, they end up in CRO and they don't realize there's, all these resources out there and all these people that are really willing to share. And like, I don't know, maybe there is in other industries and some of the other areas, PR and HR, like you do have these groups that kind of do the same thing that we're doing. I haven't seen that. It's like this digital analytics CRO culture seems very share centric.
The geeks also like their toys. I think part of it is that's a channel which we're comfortable with, and maybe in some cases go to out of preference. That you do tend to find some kind of more introverted characters in kind of the mindset. But yeah, it's an interesting mix with the different groups you get online. I'm a member of a bunch of other groups which aren't sort of CRO specific, but you do see this sort of support network stuff, but it does tend to be mostly sort of digital disciplines, which like I said, maybe it's because it's more digital natives. I think the CRO space, the point you made before about quite a lot of people coming in with different levels of experience. So you've got people who've been data scientists but now getting lumped with the business side of things. So that for them's a learning curve. You've got people who've been general marketers, maybe working in paid search, where they do need to do some statistics, they do need to do some A/B testing, they do test on creative. But yeah, you do that stuff. You can look after it for me. Tends to be how a lot of people get the CRO role. Your analytics will tack this onto your job description. And part of the problem you find is not just that they are struggling to get the right direction, is that they can't fit it into the framework they've previously worked with. There are some sort of mental shifts you need to make in terms of how you work versus kind of the AdWords machine. You can pop your coin in, you get a result out. That's kind of the black box that divides it for you is kind of opaque to you, so all you can do is just put more coins in and see what comes out. I know that's massively simplifying it, and like I said, I've just seen a good couple of weeks worth of people talking about the fact there is a lot more experimentation and kind of machine learning stuff being applied to particularly the AdWords side of things than you'd expect. But again, that tends to be the top end. For the most part, they're managing a budget, they're trying to achieve a specific goal, but when it hits the site, kind of maybe beyond the landing page, that's not their problem. And then the revenue. So there's a big gap in terms of what we look after, which is kind of what's the user experience once they've landed. Are we delivering on the promises they've made? And I think that's the argument for kind of looking outside your normal group, talking to people who use different tools to what you do, to see how the other pieces glue together. Because much as we can kind of complain because a test was polluted by an atypical campaign landing halfway through the sample, they don't know what's going on in terms of, once I've delivered to the landing page, why am I not getting my ROAS? Because we bought well, we've advertised well, the creatives are good, they're well tested, and actually, if you're working to revenue, the return on spend is partly down to whether the proposition's right, whether the UX is right. You could have the best audience, the best qualified, but if the user experience is terrible, you're not going to get enough signal to be able to work on your advertising. So I do a lot of work when I'm sitting kind of flicking between teams, and I think we're actually all trying to solve the same problem. I'm not sure there is necessarily a distinction between search engine optimization, PPC optimization, and conversion optimization, because we're all trying to get better results for the business. I think the parts that we focus on to achieve that are different, by necessity, because to be that broad would rub you so thin you'd get nothing done. But the things we're aiming for, at least at the top end on each of those, they all sound very similar. I go to a search conference, I go to a paid advertising conference, and the stuff they're talking about is it's not a foreign language. They're talking about trying to plan their audience, plan personas, run campaigns, run schedules, look at the effect over time, balance their time versus the return they can get against that time and that budget. These are all the challenges we talk about. Is talked about regularly on the Slack channel. So I think that's where not just looking at your own wheelhouse is beneficial, and the webinars that you can sit through kind of slightly bored because you're not paying attention, it's not your area. I think that's where conferences kind of make you get up and out of yourself. Things like particularly residential ones like CXL, Conversion World, where you're locked up basically for 2-3 days with like-minded people, and you never stop learning. The whole time you're having conversations, you're watching something, you make your notes, but then you come back out and talk to somebody about that. And I think that's quite hard for a lot of people. I certainly need a couple of vodkas inside me before I'll volunteer.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been trying to do for the last few years is I think you said something interesting about learning and how there's a lot of different disciplines and you kind of need to add to yourself to grow and things like that. Something that I found that marketers tend to do that I think they could generally be better at, and it's not just, I think it's everybody, I think it's all disciplines. We kind of do what we're most comfortable with. Mm-hmm. Like if you're pretty comfortable with the creative side of things, then that's, if you do any learning, then it's usually going to be focused around how do I make the creative better? How do I make the UX better? How do I do all these? And then if you're kind of like me, then I'm more familiar with like the statistical side of things, and that's kind of going to be the focus, is how do we make it more scientific and things like that. And something I've been kind of trying to do lately is go beyond that and always do something, usually at least a few times a week, that I'm really uncomfortable with, that I don't like doing, because I think the reason I don't like doing is I don't like doing it is probably because I'm not good at it. Mm-hmm. Coding is a big one. Well, for me, it used to be a big one because I wasn't very good at coding. And so I had to just like get into this process of like forcing myself every single day to just do a little bit. And I think that's a good strategy if you're a CRO, of finding like one thing, whatever it is, like, maybe it's JavaScript, maybe it's R, maybe it's SQL, or just something, whatever. And putting like an hour's worth of time into it, like every few days or something like that. I think the improvement in the CRO, like kind of how you see, and that's, we were talking about that a little bit on Slack before, how one thing that I've been trying to do recently is not just, go outside my comfort zone within CRO, but also go outside of it, generally speaking, as far as the whole marketing industry, because A/B testing is kind of unique in that we have a ton of visitors and we have, relatively low conversion rates, but we're able to launch these experiments and equally split up people, and most industries can't do that, but they have developed these techniques to still help them anyway. And we usually exclusively focus on A/B testing as a method of determining whether or not something is working, or whether or not of sort of trialing our ideas. But there's like so many other methods besides A/B testing. We just don't use them because there's no
example with the time series analysis, where
that's right,
which is anathema to what a lot of A/B testing kind of, sequential testing, really want to have the same time period. It's like, well, sometimes we don't have the luxury. So if you want to say, did this make a difference, then we can look at some time series analysis. We can say, look, there are statistical disciplines that say it changed, up or down, but we can say it changed by enough to say that was, a difference. Now, then you can try and work backwards and go kind of, well, what we're doing at the time to do so. But really, when it comes to things like advertising campaigns, particularly look at seasonal stuff, which for the most part we have to be aware of, but we try and kind of test around. We're looking for a reliable sample. But then you either don't test at all during Christmas and Black Friday, or you only do tests that are applicable to your Christmas, Black Friday audience. So the utility you get, we talked before about the value you're getting from the learning on the testing. After 3 or 4 years of testing on Black Friday, you've got your Black Friday recipe of things you could look at and the considerations you'll have from your atypical buying patterns. But you can only use that once a year. And you've got to hope that that was a clear answer and it wasn't just a false positive.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are, I think they're not in the tools, so therefore they seem scary. And to a large degree, you were saying about testing stuff. I've been doing some stuff with SQL over the last couple of weeks. I've got a project on that requires kind of bigger data than I'm used to dealing with in terms of the stuff I'm trying to pull across, and I'm basically getting the data into a format where I can do this sort of analysis, because we don't have a testing history with this client. This is kind of establishing the baseline, making some recommendations on kind of where we can direct traffic to get enough bodies going through to test. So it's a big piece of work, and it's involving new skills. I'm doing stuff with the Azure cloud. I'm looking at structuring it to fit with kind of the cloud-hosted SQL. And I've kind of done local database stuff, and the one I'm looking at now is a local hosted model, which once I've got it bloody working here, then I'll shove it back up to the cloud and go, okay, how do I query that? But that's I'm not a coder. I've always been more business side, but I've had to learn to self-serve over the last few years, and that's one where most of my friends would say, well, just hire a coder. Like, well, to do the final version, I may well do, but for me to understand what I need to ask them for, I need to get my head around it.
Right.
And some people learn different ways, but for me, I can read the theory, but until I've actually applied it in practice, it doesn't stick.
It's true. It's true. There's, and it's kind of like what you were saying before about the tools. Like, I think in CRO, people are pretty, in some ways, not in every way, but in a lot of ways, people are pretty dependent on the tools that they've been given. Like you're saying about AdWords. Well, the only thing you can use with AdWords is the AdWords tool, so kind of dependent on it. It's not really that way so much with A/B testing. Like the tools are limited to the tools, but the tools are really just an easier extension of all the other things that you can technically do on your own. Like, you can build a tool on your own, like using GTM or something, and split up your visit traffic. Like you can do that yourself. The analysis you can do yourself. All the analytics you can figure out how to do yourself.
Yeah. I mean, before I knew A/B testing was a discipline, I was doing A/B banner splits on a banner trafficking system back in sort of 05, 06. I was like, brilliant. Because what I did was I worked out the audience, and I'll do banner 1, banner 2. I'm a genius for thinking of this. And then it's research, I found out that actually, no, people have been doing this for years. And all I was doing was applying what we'd done with print split tests, working in print distribution. We'd put like leaflet 1 to distribution center 1, leaflet 2 to distribution center 2, different call numbers or different call references. So I knew the discipline. I'd done that at university, and I thought I was being super clever applying it to the website. And it turns out, the Eisenbergs were writing a book to tell us all how to do it, and they've been doing it for 10 years. But it's one of those things where learning the basics, and maths was never my strong point, was enough to get to what I needed to deliver for the customer. And 12 years ago, that was more than enough. That was more than anybody was doing. So I don't think you need to be the best in the world, because this can be a bit intimidating. Oh God, if you're relying on the tool, you're only halfway there. It's like, yeah, but that's where we all started. And some of us may have come from a different background, which gave us some color to understand why we're doing it. I think if you keep pushing towards where you need to be, then you're going to give yourself some advantages. You can have that extra half step ahead of the competition. It's what's the old joke? If we see a bear, how fast can you run? Why? Well, it doesn't matter how fast the bear can run, as long as I'm faster than you, I'm okay. And I think in kind of the marketing world, in your career, as long as you've got that step ahead of the competition, and that's, I think, how I describe sort of A/B testing, or to be fair, kind of an experimentation culture. The whole piece of looking at this is, when I'm talking to clients and prospects, I say it's not about the win from the test. It's more that everybody's doing something to optimize now, whether it just be search engine optimization or paid search optimization if they're optimizing for spend only, or if they are looking at the UX. But everybody is now trying to do better. They're not going site launch, wait 5 years, site launch, wait 5 years. So if you're not doing it, you're falling behind. So it becomes a competitive advantage. And if you're less good at it, your competitive advantage over your competitors, they're out there doing a better job for your prospects.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that I think there's with the testing specifically, because that's obviously where my wheelhouse is. But it's just I think the same kind of ideas ring true for pretty much every part of CRO. Is it if you're kind of conditioned to only focus on the A/B test or the tool, if you're using a test and target, if you're using an optimizer or something like that, then
or a site spec.
or gotta get the plug.
No, I don't think I could commission on that one, but
Okay.
just for fair balance, and Optimizely and BWO and Dennis at Convert.com done some very good.
That's right. That's right.
Let's give him a shout out as well.
Yeah. But it's like, those techniques that you're using to do, you have a control, you have a treatment, and you run an experiment, and then you observe your results, and you have a significant level. You can do those. You can do those anywhere. I was when I spoke at Conversion World recently. One of the things that I kind of I talked about was that there are methods, like, let's say you're an agency or a consultancy or something like that. There are techniques you can use where you can perform an A/B test, a time series based A/B test on whether or not you've actually made this person more money over time. The reason that a lot of clients don't buy it, if you just say, hey, we've made you X amount, is because they'll be like, okay, well, I heard that all the time with AdWords. When I used to run AdWords accounts for people, they would say, well, we're spending all this money on AdWords, but people are Googling us anyway. They're typing our names into Google anyway. So what's to say that you're just cannibalizing the traffic from the organic searches?
Yep.
Which is a fair question in a lot of cases.
I'll bring something up in a minute that reminds me of something, but that's the most common thing for most of the agencies, whatever side is there, they will say kind of, well, we would have done this well anyway. What's to say that? So the A/B test is kind of become a crutch to go kind of like, well, here we go. The two things were different in this period, but there are other mechanisms. It's interesting you mentioned kind of about have we made you more money or are we cannibalizing? So one of the guys who spoke, I actually saw him at Search Love last year, and he spoke at Inbound of this year. Is a guy called Will Critchlow. No, not Will Critchlow. Guy called Will. I'm going to have to Google that now because I'm getting my names confused. But he did something on Power BI. As you know, I've been using Power BI a fair bit recently, and he was showing people how to bring down their data from SEMrush, which is a tool which allows you to bring down your paid search results or your paid impressions, and the AdWords stuff. So effectively, your organic and AdWords. So you'd be able to compare what was at position 1 for a keyword on organic versus what the projected cost was. So that he was basically showing a table to say, here's what the estimated cost is for bidding on this keyword in kind of the general average, and here's what our actuals are for what we paid for that keyword. And then filtering it down from sort of several million rows to being, right, here's the top 10% of sale values. So what keywords are we doing well on that make us the most sales? And then looking back the other way, which ones are we spending the most on, which make us no sales? So if you're looking to optimize, again, data's key. And an awful lot of that stuff had been done by gut feel, but it was mostly trying to feel your way around. And this was somebody doing a data discipline I very much recognize. I've got a similar model myself in Power BI on the screen at the moment. And he was showing a search audience how if they're just doing in Excel with VLOOKUPs, they're missing a trick. Like, the game has evolved, and he was saying, I'm not going to show you how I'm doing all of this because this is my head start and I'm learning like crazy. And with Power BI you have to, because they're doing a new feature release every month. So there's new tools and toys coming in. But that was a very kind of conversion optimization, a growth hacker minded paid search talk. But I recognized that drive. I must do this better. Look what I did last week. Look what I'll do. Will Reynolds, not Will Critchlow, I think works for Distilled. So get my Wills confused. So yeah, Will Reynolds from Sear was doing this thing. He's got a couple of videos on YouTube about this, and the whole audience was kind of like, because he was, loud American, going, you're doing it wrong, but the point was true. This is kind of, he showed a simple model, what you can do with like maybe an hour's work, and take it from, let's look at my top 10 keywords. Why? Because that's what I can do in Excel, into let's crunch 8 million of them and do it at a decent level. And there were some kind of some toys within that, but that mentality is not limited to A/B testing. That certainly wasn't an A/B test, although there was provision within the way he's kind of heading with that model to kind of go, okay, here's how we performed over time. So if you were going to say we've made a difference, if you start going, well, that's a word to target, rather than going, we were at position 3, we've got it to position 1, you could look at the amount of effort it took you to get there, what that made difference in terms of your ROI, and the time period over which that happened. So the time series analysis, but applied across the advertising side of things, but be able to drill down to every single part, even down to individual keywords and the creatives used. Now, most companies aren't going to be able to do that because they don't have the data exposed to the size of the account. But the logic for doing that would work whether you're doing it on 10 and just want to run that report every day, or 10,000 and run it every hour. So there's already kind of tools out there. Met a guy who works for an AdWords tool called Optimizer, and they're applying machine learning techniques.
Very similar names with some of these tools, aren't there?
There is very much a vibe there, but that's what their tool does. And there's the similar ones like that. Again, it's not kind of like a plug fest. These are just kind of people who are out there trying to solve these problems. And I think that's what kind of the point was in this is if we're all trying to do better, whichever discipline we're looking at, and we're all trying to better ourselves to get better at these things, there are tools out there which will help us, but they may not necessarily be the tools we'd expect to rely on or would look at. So I'd maybe encourage people who are just using their A/B testing tool, just using their session cam tool, to maybe look at some of the tools which allow them to look into the keywords. So during a test, okay, when I'm setting my baselines, what keywords, what intent, how much are we paying for this traffic? Because if I'm optimizing to AdWords traffic and I'm able to segment to AdWords and organic and say, oh, this test worked particularly well or badly for AdWords, that's a nice to know, or they screwed up my average. But actually have a look and see what the AdWords costs. Have a look and see how much your SEO budget costs. Because if that traffic costs more and you're able to improve it more, or you're able to align your testing to improve it more, then your return on investment is more than what you're seeing on just the site. Your return on investment could actually be a cost reduction to somebody upstream of you, which in terms of money to be reinvested into both growing the market or growing your CRO team, it may not be an area that's in your wheelhouse, but actually helps with that communication piece we talked about before with stakeholders. You know, if you can go to somebody saying, these landing pages, how much do you spend on them? Great, well, this recipe looks like I can reduce the bounce rate and increase people clicking into something positive by 30%. What does that do to your quality score?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's you kind of, you know, one of the ways I like to think about it is where people, sometimes I think people start at the wrong place. You know, people start and they say, you know, what are the tools that are available, and then what can I do with the tools? Whereas I think a better thing to start with would be, what are the questions that I have, and then what are the methods that are available to me to answer those questions. So it might be investing in a brand new tool. It might be, and I know this is going to sound crazy, and a lot of people think that they can't do it, but it might be doing something yourself, like building your own tool, or at least building your own method, which sounds, you know, it sounds like, oh man, you know, I don't have the time to do that. I don't have the technical ability to do that. It's not that hard. It's not that hard.
Just please, for my sanity, no more frameworks. Every single presentation I've seen over the last month, let me just introduce my framework. I'm like, really, a framework?
You know,
those today. But yeah, I mean, the tool I'm building at the moment is something which will help automate some of those questions I'm asking, regular questions I'm asking, but I want to ask them at scale. I want to do it on more than one account. So I'm looking at building something which will help with this specific case. But the bits I'm building in my spare time, the cloud sort of is partly to learn what I need to get out of that, and partly to understand and look around to see if there's tools out there do it already. Because if there are tools that do it already, I'm going to go buy them. But learning it, understanding what I'd want that tool to do, part of it is taking the thing apart, you know, taking the whole thing back to its bare bones and go, which of these bits are actually useful to me, which bits are marketing fluff. And that helps, I think, concentrate the mind in terms of what you want to do in terms of vendor selection, but it also helps in terms of thinking through the problem. It's what I do with the sites. You know, people go, I want to make more money. Well, let's look at how customers get to the point where they give you money. Let's break that down. So I think taking the discipline of what we do as optimizers, but then applying that to the other areas is a worthwhile discipline, because a worthwhile exercise, because we're going to find that the methodology we're talking about, the scientific, the investigation, even just the heuristic part, tearing that down is going to give ourselves more opportunities, more places to test, more understanding of the value of the tests, and then we can start to add that little part into our priority matrix or whatever we want to do in terms of what we're considering. I threw one at you a couple of months ago where you kind of talking about the cost, and I said, well, have you factored in your production costs for these tests beyond just time? How many developers, whether it's a senior developer or a junior developer, because that's part of ROI. And you're like, oh, I've got to include this in my model now. But that sort of extra piece of, if I'm going to build this to scale, then I need to think about the other cost, which is the humans, not just hours spent, but what those hours cost, and what the cost of upskilling is, and what the damage to my progress is if I am hiring at half the rate I need to be. And that's a problem you hear a lot as well, is I can't get good people. Okay, well, what does a good person cost you versus what an average person costs you? Would an average person be acceptable versus the drop in growth of waiting for the perfect unicorn? And that's a sum you can do. But actually, if you've not collected the numbers for that, it's not a sum you can do. You end up going off gut feel. So I think taking the mentality of how we approach optimization for a website, we should perhaps turn our tool set inwards a little bit, optimize ourselves. I'm all for optimizing the optimizers, but also kind of look at how we're dealing with the overall picture. And what I sort of talk about is business optimization. Quite often the website is just a reflection of the errors that are being made across the business. So if you want to fix the website, maybe you should look at kind of fixing the proposition and the way things are handled, the way people are hired, because there's how you ended up with a website that's not working the way you want it to.
Yeah, I agree. Optimizing the optimizer is I think it's something everybody should strive for. But I got to run. It's been no
worries. We're probably out of time anyway, so good to catch up. We'll probably have Manuel back, maybe not next week, but he's off touring the world. I think he's in Toronto at the moment. So the other guys and maybe some special guests next week. So that's been Chad Sanderson and Tim Stewart. Been talking for Conversionations, brought to you by Effective Experiments, and we will catch you again soon.
All right.
Bye now.